or cool, recording is in progress. Awesome. So I will share my screen and then we will start the discussion. It's percent. Okay. Awesome. So as we just introduced ourselves, this is the CR team, your CRCs. So each chapter will have one of your CRCs assigned, so you should know your CRC. Going on to the agenda today, like I said, there are a few topics I want to give a few slides on. Those are firstly budgeting, so figuring out, what do you actually need in terms of resources for your chapter, and then going into ways to fundraise and get corporate sponsorship to fill that budget. Some housekeeping details. You can also follow your chapter leaders, other chapter leaders, and the chapter relations team on Slack if you have any kind of ad hoc questions outside of these typical sessions. So that's always an option, and we have more resources on our website at ESW. So there's also resources out there for fundraising and sponsorship if you wanted some other on-paper resources outside this call. Like I said before, this is your chapter relations team. So you'll see your chapter relations coordinator on this slide, depending on your region. Like I said before, again, this is meant to be an open discussion, so jump in at any point, ask questions. This will be the first chapter chat of the fall season, and then we'll have two other ones. So the next one will be on October 24th, again, a Sunday, and then the third will also be on a Sunday, but in November, so November 21st, right before finals. And those will be on different topics that are also kind of pertinent for the beginning of the academic year. So first off, on budgeting. So first, before you even get into fundraising and sponsorship, it's important to figure out what your chapter actually needs. And so, thinking about at the start of the school year, creating a budget is super important. So you want to figure out, okay, I have ESW dues, I have these projects that are kicking up and I'll need materials for them. I need some money to run events. If there's other things specific to your chapter and the way that it operates, you also want to make sure you capture those and write those down as part of your budget as well. Part of this, you might have some typical funding sources that you have every year. It's either university funding or it's club funding. So making sure you've accounted for that and whether you have those sources as an option for this year as well, and you can write that down. Or if you have funding that's carrying over from last year, like in this case, coming out of a COVID year might be a little bit different. You might have funding that you couldn't use last year for events that you now have the ability to use this year. So taking that into consideration and making sure that you documented that. Also really important, year over year, typically you might have some turnover in your treasurer or your VP of finance or whoever that person on your board is who actually manages a lot of the budget and the finance for the group. So making sure that you really write down and transition that knowledge year over year so that nothing gets lost is super important. And so that's, part of writing down the budget is just also, having it somewhere where you can see and look back to past year's budgets, see what you spent in prior years and understand if you want or if you need that same those same resources for this current year. So that's kind of your first step before even thinking about fundraising. So figuring out, okay, what do you actually need? And then figuring out what are your set sources, and then figuring out what the gaps are and how you can fill them with fundraising and or corporate sponsorship, depending on what makes the most sense for your chapter. So first, a few kind of questions on this. So for those on the call, have you created a budget for this year? Is this something that is part of your annual process or part of your typical transitions for your e-board, or how do you typically think about budgeting?
For my group, it's mainly by projects. Like our chapter is broken up into different sub teams that work on quite unrelated projects, but all related to sustainability. So we have our project manager kind of take care of that front. And like as co-presidents or as treasurer, we kind of just check in with them once a week to provide support.
Mm-hmm. Awesome.
Yeah, kind of the same way for us. We usually have like the project leads deal with their own team's budget, because we have not funded a project ourselves as an org. We instead go through like school funding things, that application that our school has mainly. But I guess in the future, it's something that we will have to do because we would like to actually fund our own projects. So definitely, I don't know why we haven't been doing this, but yeah, I don't think we've ever actually made like an overall club budget.
Yeah, and some universities also, I think, require you to fill out budgets sometimes to apply for funding. I know mine did, so that also might be embedded in the processes of some organizations just because the university does require that. Versus if it's more just like kind of left, to you as part of your organization, it might be able managed a little bit differently. Awesome. So kind of thinking about budgeting and thinking about, what resources you need. Then the next thing we want to talk about was fundraising and just some tips there. So I'll flip it over to Matthew for some more info there.
Hey everyone, how's it going? So we wanted to cover fundraising. It's a really important topic for a lot of chapters because sometimes you're not able to get, all the funding you need for your projects through the school, through grants and stuff. So it's on your own to raise money for different miscellaneous funds as well. So some really good fundraising events that we do have. If you go back a slide, Emma, if you don't mind. Perfect. So I know we're all super used to online events, but there's still a really easy, viable thing with different chapters being in different situations. Some of you may not be able to meet all in person, so having big game nights or trivia nights with a small buy-in fee is definitely an option. You can also have kind of like a big prize. That way, overall you're still kind of netting an income in this game night, those online events. But beyond that, there's still tons of different options. A lot of local restaurants, especially near college campuses, will do things called profit shares. Basically, you work with a local restaurant, and then some night of a week or a certain day, it'll be your org's day. If you have people come in and mention your name, your organization's name, part of the profits from that day will actually go towards your organization. So it's a really low effort, but very easy way to bring in some income. It's a great way to just, keep pushing just to bring small amounts of income in. Another really great option is club merch. And from club merch, that can range from, actual club t-shirts to different merchandising options that you may have for your organization. Definitely check out the ESW branding guide for things along that matter if you have your own different brands that you want to do. But selling t-shirts is honestly a great way to bring in money for the org. You can partner that with chapter dues. You pay X amount of money for chapter dues and you get a t-shirt and tons of other benefits, but that's a great way to bring in money, as well as, different sustainable craft sales, selling potted plants, building your own terrariums. There's a lot of really cool ideas there for fundraising. Beyond that, there's also just straight up crowdfunding. There's a lot of different crowdfunding options out there. I'm sure you guys all know about it, Kickstarter and the like. So having a giving day campaign where you reach out to close friends, families, alumni of your chapter, things like that. That's honestly a great way to get donations in. If you go to the next slide. So like I said, there's tons of crowdfunding platforms out there, but you may need to check with your university. There might be certain rules with your student council or your organization that oversees your student orgs. Maybe they have certain rules with that. So definitely, just do your due diligence to see what you can actually do, so you don't get any trouble with your university and you don't tie up any of your money. Some other great ideas that are out there are, hosting audits or other engineering workshops. A large majority of the student chapter base is, engineering students. So hosting these Autodesk or AutoCAD, different types of CAD program workshops might be something that's really worth exploring, as well as just different chapter skills to the people in the community that you may have. It could be a lot of different things that you guys specialize in. So a lot of really cool options there. A lot of really, really cool options to do for fundraising. So we wanted to bring it up to you guys. What have been some really successful fundraisers that you guys have done? Have you been able to do them this year? I'm sure you've had them in the past, but then COVID hit. So are you looking to bring back any really big fundraisers you've had in the past? And if so, would you like to share it with the rest of the group just so other people can, draw inspiration?
So I'll go. This is something we didn't do this year because my officers were concerned about COVID. But in the past, A&M has like a system where they get clubs to have some people volunteer at the football games to like check tickets and to like do concessions and stuff. And so they'll pay like, I think like something around like $10 an hour to the club, like per person, but they have to work like a certain amount of hours and you have to like guarantee you'll be there for 4 games or something. But yeah, that used to be like a really big, I mean, before COVID, it used to be a really big income for us, especially when we could get people to do it. But unfortunately, we didn't do it this year just because like we didn't know with all the at the beginning of the year with the Delta and stuff. But yeah, maybe if your school is big on sports, you could try to do that or something.
That's a really good option. I've actually heard of a lot of different chapters that do that for after football games, the stadium cleanup. So that's good to know A&M does it as well. Anyone have any ideas of fundraisers that did not work? Something you thought might work really well and maybe it didn't pan out the way you hoped, and any reasons why, just so people can learn from, no, there's no such thing as a wrong answer or mistakes. There's always something to learn from. No worries if not. And the last kind of question we have for fundraising is, a lot of different schools have different fundraising options. Some it's through the, engineering student council, some are through, different green programs that the university hosts. Does anyone gain most of their funding from a specific source that you think might be helpful for other chapters to explore?
I don't know if this is an option everywhere, but like one of the crowds fundraiser that we've done in the past is something called Catalyzer. It's like a Northwestern thing, where we basically like there's a website and then we go on it and then we post like our project, and then alumni or people interested will like donate to the project. Yeah, so it's like just a crowd fundraiser, but school specific. So maybe that could be an option. That's the thing.
That's cool. It's a really good idea having specific, crowdfunding Kickstarters for specific projects. That's a really good point. That way they kind of can see the actual progress of where the money would go to. That's cool. Thanks, Bill. Well, I think we can move on to sponsorship as well now. Some tips on that.
Awesome. And yeah, and so maybe after the sponsorship section, we'll pick on Bill a little bit more to hear a little bit more about how Northwestern's done some funding. So I'll actually shift that from now until after sponsorship to another few slides. But Sarah will talk us through that piece. So let's go there now.
Yeah. So one of the things that can be helpful for filling out your budgets and funding projects and events that can be a little bit more stable or higher quantities of money than just fundraising is sponsorship. And the key things to start thinking about this is that it takes a little bit longer than setting up a fundraiser. So starting the summer or even like the spring before you're expecting to have this money is definitely a good idea. But generally you want to start by thinking about who your potential supporters are. And that can be organizations where parents work or alumni work, or where people in your club have interned. Other good ideas are local organizations, especially those who are interested in sustainability or public service, or those that already partner with other groups at the university. And then the third is larger engineering companies or tech companies that will fund projects. And a lot of times, like sometimes those companies will have set programs to do so or set funds, but a lot of times they'll also just, if you reach out, will set up sponsors. And then the last is things that are more like grant programs. So ESW has a project grant that is currently open, and you can apply with existing projects or with new project ideas. And that's something that we'll do every year. So it's not always going to be set up, but it's project specific, and you can apply for it every year. And then another option, there's an EPA program. Autodesk will do some grants sometimes. I know the Biomimicry Institute has done some. So looking at those types of options are always a good idea. And this is the type of thing where if you're expecting or to rely on this, reaching out to multiple organizations is likely a good idea, because, you know, it's unlike setting up a fundraiser, it's not guaranteed, you know, until somebody responds and says yes. So, you know, staying organized, making sure you're tracking who you're going to talk to is a good idea. And also then if you graduate, it's something you can pass on to future leadership. And then next slide. Yeah, and so one of the key things about sponsorship is that unless it's an organization that you already have a very close tie to, having a sponsorship packet or similar marketing materials is a good idea. You generally want to talk about, you know, what the goal of your organization is, what the goal of the funding is, where that money is going, what projects it's going to fund, why that's important. It's helpful to add photos, especially of the team and of people working on projects or prototypes if you already have them. We do have a sponsorship packet template on the resources page of the ESW website that goes through all of the sections you might want to include with some formatting ideas. But this is something that having a professional like sponsorship packet is definitely going to be helpful in having that conversation and leaving a good impression and making the company that you're asking to sponsor you feel confident that you're going to use their money well. And it also makes it easier to reach out to multiple groups if you have a packet already put together with that information. And then one of the key things about sponsorships is that these are relationships that you want to maintain. And so if you're, you know, if you have a sponsorship and you would like that to be something that happens year to year, keeping up that relationship and making sure that you know, email them updates and thank them is a very important step in that process. And then another key thing I want to talk about is sponsorship doesn't necessarily have to be for funding, for money, but sometimes, especially local organizations, will be willing to lend or donate materials. And that is another good way to do outreach for funding projects, where instead of you're getting money to go out and buy materials, you can have, especially like local engineering groups, or, you know, if there's like a reuse center or the recycling center or a local bike shop that has, you know, extra chains and sprockets, like, you know, having relationships with local companies that are willing to give you material can also be a really great way to get what you need for your projects. Next slide. So you know, this is something that we definitely have some chapters who have spent time working on. It's something that other chapters, you mention it and they're like, I have never thought about that or heard about that, especially those who have more university funding. But just curious if anyone has questions, if you guys have worked on these types of or have gotten funding through sponsorship before. I know that this is something, the Cornell chapter, when I was there, somebody interned at a biogas company, and was able to have them donate money to fund one of the biofuels projects that they were working on. And I think it helps that, somebody had interned there, had reached out to somebody they knew. They had a sponsorship packet that was put together and it was a related project. And so I think that, I don't think it was a particularly big company, but it was, they were able to have that relationship and to have this company donate funding for our project. And then I also just want to point out, if you decide that this is something that you're interested in and you go and look at the sponsorship packet and suddenly you're like, oh my God, this is a lot, or, I have questions or anything, reaching out to your CRCs or to any of us on this call, or posting in the global Slack, there are definitely people who can answer those questions and help you with the process. All right, I'll turn it back over to you, Emma, if nobody has any questions.
Awesome, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, so I think now I just kind of want to open the discussion a little bit and kind of chat with Bill more directly about kind of Northwestern's approach to fundraising. I know via your CRC, they mentioned that you use ESW grants as a source of funding. So just wanted to ask a few questions around how you decided that was the right approach to funding for your team, if there's other things you considered and that made the most sense. Is that something you do every year? So I just want to get a little more a sense of how your group approached that.
Yeah, so the reason we kind of turned to grants instead of crowd fundraisers or other strategies you guys talked about is because almost, I would say 99% of our cost comes from materials for projects. So these are really easy to itemize and kind of request for these specific materials. Yeah, and we do have to spend some money with recruitment. We have to buy food and stuff like that. That kind of cost won't be covered by any sort of grant we have access to. But luckily, in the past, we have gotten a pretty, I think we have accumulated a pretty good amount of money for those purposes. So thus far, we haven't had to explore those options.
Awesome. So it's really more of just the fact that you already have the set kind of sources that you look at every year, and so you've never had to expand beyond that.
Yeah, exactly. Because what we're spending money on right now is just all materials, buying a lot of materials to build stuff.
Awesome. And when it comes to things like ESW dues and conferences and things like that, and events, if you wanted to hold them, would that also come from that kind of same fundraising source or the university?
Yeah, we've done a catalyzer before. Actually, I think that was for a project. I think one of them was for a project. The other one might have been for a general fund, but that was way before I joined. So that money is left over from probably more than 6 years ago. Yeah.
Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions for Bill around that or fundraising in general?
Yes, I just want to add, the process of applying for ESW grant, at least when we did it, was pretty straightforward. So I think Carly and the leadership at ESW provided a lot of support. So if you guys are interested in applying for a project, I think you will also get a lot of support.
Awesome. And when you kind of transition e-boards, is it something that you would talk to the incoming, treasurer or whoever that role is about and say like, okay, in the past, we applied to ESW grants, or is that something that kind of came out of a discussion with your CRC or looking at resources?
I think I personally heard about the grant actually from Carly, I want to say. So it was from the CRC, but we have a big spreadsheet of all the past grants and like funding sources that we've applied to. So like we pass that along.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. So that's kind of part of your regular transition of here's how we typically go about this.
Mhm.
Awesome. Awesome. Does anyone else have any questions, anything to add on that? Well, thank you for joining today. I know you kind of asked you to join and give your perspective, but hopefully it's helpful for other chapters to kind of hear about, why you chose to go the project grant route, why it made sense for you. Also different parts of funding, since that is typically one of like the bigger challenges for chapters, especially smaller chapters too, that are kind of starting to establish themselves more. I think fundraising is tough, and then also creating any sort of a corporate sponsorship packet is also challenging. And so I know Northwestern hasn't really done that too much, but I think some other chapters rely on that pretty heavily in terms of bringing people to speak to the group, or using it as an opportunity for a certain company to kind of get more exposure to the students as well, so making it like a kind of a two-way street there. Just kind of opening the discussion a little bit more broadly. So we've talked now about budgeting, we talked about fundraising, we talked about corporate sponsorship. Are there any other thoughts, questions around any of those topics?
I was just curious, is there anyone in here who has used corporate sponsor packets? Because that's something my club, I guess, yeah, is trying to implement maybe this semester or next semester. So I was just wondering how that works for anyone else.
Yeah, we use corporate packets. So depending on who I'm talking to, like if I've talked to them before, I'll usually like send it in the first email. But if I'm like cold emailing people, sometimes I won't send it at first so I don't overwhelm them with information. And if they say they're like interested, then I send the packet along. And that just has like what we do as an org, what like our prices are. And for us, we have to get that approved by the SEC at school. So yeah, that's how we use our packets.
So do you like email to be like, hey, are you interested in funding, or how do you start that conversation?
Yeah, so my emails are usually like, hey, my name is my name, what I do, and I'm like, I'm part of this org called ESW at UT Austin, and we would love to have you like present at one of our meetings. That's our biggest sponsorship thing. They come and they like will present for recruitment at one of our general meetings. And then like I'm like, I attach the corporate packet at the end. If you have any questions, let me know. Usually you actually have to send the packet a couple times because people will forget about it. But yeah, that's how it goes.
Oh, okay. So like, does your corporate packet only for like funding, or is it also for like, because we have people come and speak too, but we never like send them the packet, I guess. Because I thought the packet was just for funding.
Yeah, I only send it to the people who do funding, but that's because that's all I handle. Because I'm just the corporate part of ESW.
Yeah.
But yeah, I usually am like, if you're interested in working with us, this is our packet. And then it's mostly just for funding. It does have information about what we do in general, but I'm pretty sure we just use it in case we need to like get money from someone.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome. Are there any other thoughts on that? Even, from the CRC's thoughts on what worked, what didn't work for your chapters, or if any of you use corporate sponsorship or fundraising sources that we didn't mention. Were there any that were like particularly helpful, or not as helpful as you hoped? My chapter also relied not pretty heavily, but in part on a Giving Day campaign that was run by the university every year. So I think it sounds similar to the Catalyzer initiative that Bill mentioned. So that was a source for us. But then the university kind of club funding was another big one that we could rely on every year. And then, like Sarah mentioned, we were in the same chapter, so we did have some sponsorship from some companies that more went towards parts and like very specific projects versus just like overall operating costs. So I feel like those were our biggest pieces, and we did have a sponsorship packet on hand just to have and at the ready when we did have companies that we thought would be interesting to work with. So I know that was something we always tried to have on hand, ready to go, just in our back pocket, even though we didn't really target that as a major source of funding. In terms of fundraisers, we did try and do some events. We had some recurring ones every year that'd be more for our members and like friends of members to come and donate. But I think on the whole, those weren't our main source of funding. It was more difficult to get funding from other students, which I'm sure other chapters have experienced that as well. Like a bake sale and things like that are not always the most effective ways to raise money, but we did try and do those a few times too.
I'll just add a few things. I was in kind of a smaller chapter, so most of our money came from, I think we got some money from the university, like just normal university money that all of the clubs get. But most of our money came from, like writing, I guess, like emails or letters to like the different department heads of the various colleges, asking them if they could, I guess, like donate or contribute money to send, X number of students to like conference, or like, and we put in like a little budget about like very high level, just quick little summary about how much it would be. And we ended up getting like a fair amount of money from several different departments, even departments that, we didn't even think we'd have a chance of getting money from, because they really don't have anything to do with engineering. So I think that might be something that you guys could also potentially look into, depending on, I guess, the organization of your university. And another that worked for us was, well, we didn't personally use it, but I was in one of the student government halls for a little while, and they had like a budget that they could use to donate money to clubs for whatever they needed. So I think we had like a poker club come in and give a presentation about how they needed like X amount of dollars to get a new poker table. And this is what they would use it for. So like that might also be something worth looking into, like checking out your university's like student government or activities board or student council or what have you. They usually, I would say they probably usually have a little bit of money set aside to help, help clubs. Maybe.
Awesome. Yeah. So the next slide I had in here was thinking about doing breakout sessions depending on the size of the group. But I feel like we have a pretty good group in this room already. So I won't go through that, but I will stop sharing. And just if there's any other thoughts, feel free to share them. Any questions? I'll be sending out the deck that was shared as well as the recording. So if there are other members of your chapter who couldn't make it but would have liked to join, they can rewatch it or flip through the slides. So that will happen. But if there are any other questions, this is a great time to hear from your CRCs, hear from other chapters, because we do have a few different universities on, which is awesome. So good opportunity to hear about what other chapters are doing or are not doing. So yeah, just a final plug to say this is a great time to discuss this further. And I know this is the start of the school year, so probably a lot of this is going on right now in terms of figuring out funding and for the rest of the school year. So hopefully this is topical, top of mind. Awesome. Well, if there's nothing else, I won't keep everyone captive here. But thank you all for joining, and thank you especially to Bill and the Northwestern team for sharing. Definitely appreciate it. And hopefully we'll see you all in a few weeks in our next chapter chat.
Thank you all for sharing.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Emma.
everyone.
Have a good week, everyone. Bye.
You too.
Bye.